He was one of the most powerful men in the country, but all his billions couldn't heal the wound that truly mattered. After firing 7 caretakers in just 1 month, he was desperate. Desperate to save his little boy, who hadn't spoken a single word since losing his mother. Alexander Grant, a billionaire feared in boardrooms, broken at home. He was ready to give up, until a quiet housekeeper with a painful past stepped in and did what no world-class therapist ever could. What happened next would shatter him to his core. Before I take you further into this heartbreaking story, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. We always love knowing. Alexander Grant had everything men dream of: unlimited wealth, political influence, and a pharmaceutical empire built with ruthless precision. Yet none of it mattered when he stood inside his enormous silent mansion, staring at his 5-year-old son, Noah. Since the funeral, the boy hadn't spoken a single word. The sound of laughter that once filled their home had vanished overnight. Noah didn't answer when called. He avoided every gaze. He cowered at the touch of a hand. Doctors labeled it severe autism. At first, Alexander thought it was grief. But weeks stretched into months, and the truth became cruelly clear. His son was trapped in a world he could never reach. The boy screamed when anyone tried to hold him. He panicked under the glare of bright lights. He sat for hours, lost in silence, staring at walls or at nothing at all. Alexander, the man who had crushed hostile takeovers and stared down billion-dollar lawsuits, felt helpless for the first time in his life. The Grant mansion was a fortress of glass and marble, vast, cold, echoing with emptiness. Servants moved like shadows through its halls, careful to never upset the boy. 7 nannies had come and gone in 1 month. Some quit, others collapsed under the pressure, and the rest fired in Alexander's rage because he couldn't bear to watch Noah flinch from every voice, every hand. He shouted at the caretakers, blaming them, but deep inside he knew the truth. They weren't the problem. He was. Every failure from another expert was like another crack in Alexander's soul. He kept his distance, watching Noah from doorways, afraid of getting too close. The boy didn't recognize him, not as a father, not as anyone. That thought haunted him more than any scandal or courtroom ever could. Night after night, long after. The staff had gone to bed. Alexander roamed the silent corridors like a ghost. Sometimes he paused outside Noah's door, listening. The boy no longer cried. No sound came from that room at all, and the silence cut deeper than any scream. Alexander tried to imagine his son dreaming, maybe good dreams, but a darker fear always came. What if Noah's world held nothing but fear and shadows? Sometimes Alexander stood outside for hours, clutching the doorframe, unable to move. Other times he collapsed into his office chair, pouring drink after drink, staring at faded photographs. His wife smiling, Noah as a baby. All pieces of a life that had vanished forever. Questions gnawed at him endlessly. Had he worked too much? Traveled too often? Did Noah secretly blame him for her death? He never found the answers. All he had were sleepless nights, heavy regrets, and the crushing fear that time was slipping away. Doctors had thrown every solution at them. Speech, therapy, behavioral therapy, even experimental programs. Alexander paid for them all. The best specialists, the most expensive sessions. But still, nothing. Each therapist left with tired eyes, whispering words he despised. Progress will take time, but Alexander was a man who bought results, not promises. And what he got was silence. Noah ignored the toys, shredded picture boards, screamed at nothing, spun in circles until he fell. Alexander once sat through a session but stormed out halfway, slamming the door in fury, not at the therapists, but at himself. For all his money, all his power, he couldn't heal his son. All he wanted was a single word: Dad. He had the mansion modified, dim lights installed, walls padded, soundproofing layered into Noah's room. Meal after meal was a battlefield. If food looked wrong, he refused to eat. If bath water was too warm, he screamed in terror. 2 aides had to help just to wash him. Still, through all the chaos, Alexander clung to a fragile hope that one day, somehow, Noah might reach out. But with each passing day, with each empty glance from his son, that hope felt like it was bleeding away. He withdrew from his empire, stopped visiting the city. The once feared billionaire was now a prisoner of his own mansion, chained by a silence he couldn't break. The worst moment came one quiet morning. Alexander entered Noah's room holding a small toy car, the boy's favorite once upon a time. He knelt down on the carpet. "Look, buddy," he whispered, rolling it gently. The car moved forward. Noah didn't even blink. Alexander tried again, adding silly engine noises like he used to. Nothing. Just a slow, empty blink. And then, without warning, Noah shrieked. Hands clamped over his ears as if Alexander's love itself was too loud. The billionaire froze, his heart breaking, then placed the toy down and backed away. That night he sat alone in the dark, whispering to himself a thought that terrified him more than death itself. What if my own son never remembers me at all? The risk was real. Yet something about Clara's silence clung to Alexander's mind. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't begged or argued. She had simply let little Noah's quiet trust speak for her in her absence. That alone said something no words ever could. But Alexander felt trapped. He had advisors breathing down his neck, a ruthless reputation to uphold, and above all, a fragile son to protect. If anything went wrong under his roof, the world would blame him. That night, after hours of torment, he made the call. Clara had to leave. The next morning, he summoned her into the kitchen. His voice was sharp, cold, like steel. "You've done well here, but this can't continue." Clara didn't plead. She didn't even ask why. She simply nodded, packed her few belongings, and slipped out the back door. Noah was in the hallway as she passed. His wide eyes followed her every step. Clara gave him one small wave but said nothing. Then she was gone. The mansion turned silent, heavy, colder than ever before. At dinner that night, Noah refused to sit. He shoved his plate away, curled in the corner, and when the staff tried to soothe him, he erupted. His screams pierced the walls. Alexander rushed over, whispering softly, but Noah thrashed, banging his head against the wall again and again. Doctors were called. Nothing worked. Sedatives failed. Restraints only made things worse. Hours passed, and the boy's cries only grew louder, his small body trembling with terror. For the first time in years, Alexander Grant, the billionaire who could buy anything, sat powerless on the floor, his head in his hands. His son was breaking in front of him, and he had no way to stop it. The house was full of staff, full of wealth, yet not a soul knew what to do. For weeks, they had leaned on Clara, and now she was gone, because of his choice. For the first time, Alexander wondered if he had made the gravest mistake of his life. Maybe the rumors about Clara's past were true. Maybe she wasn't perfect. But inside this house, inside Noah's fragile little world, she had done what no one else could. She had brought peace. That night, as Noah finally collapsed into a bruised, restless sleep, Alexander sat beside the bed, staring at his child's swollen forehead and listening to his broken breaths. Regret gnawed at him. He had trusted reports, background checks, polished resumes. None of that had ever reached Noah. Only Clara had, because trust isn't built on papers. It's felt, quietly, in patience, in presence. Alexander remembered. Her soft voice, her refusal to force Noah, the way his son had looked at her, like she mattered. And now she was gone. For the first time, Alexander admitted the truth to himself. No fortune, no power could fix this. He would have to do something harder than all of that. Admit he was wrong. Maybe somehow find a way to bring Clara back. But fate had its own plans. One afternoon, as Clara was dusting the shelves in Alexander's private study, her cloth slipped and knocked over a stack of old children's books, once Noah's favorites. Behind them, something yellowed and forgotten caught her eye. A sealed envelope, thick with dust, labeled in faded ink. Noah, initially Val. Clara froze. Carefully she opened it. Inside were medical papers full of terms she struggled to read, until one phrase leapt off the page. Sensory processing disorder. Not autism. Her breath caught. The report detailed therapies Noah had never received, treatments focused on sound, light, and touch sensitivities, not behavior control. At the bottom was a signature, Dr. Joseph Lang. Clara's hands trembled. She had never heard Alexander mention this doctor. She checked the date, years ago, before Noah had stopped speaking completely. Why had this been buried? Stapled at the back was a note, forwarded to Ms. Veronica Hale. Clara's stomach turned cold. Veronica, the same, woman who had destroyed her life, who had whispered poison into Alexander's ear. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The next morning, Clara quietly approached Noah's current therapist, Dr. Collins, and slid the papers across the desk. Dr. Collins read every word slowly, her face tightening. This makes sense, she whispered. This explains him. This isn't classic autism. He's overwhelmed, not detached. Clara exhaled, her heart pounding. But she also knew this truth wouldn't be simple. If Veronica had buried it once, she'd bury it again. But this time, Clara wasn't afraid. That night, Clara sat by Noah's bed, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. He clutched his stuffed horse, sleeping peacefully. She bent low, whispering, "I won't let them hurt you again." For the first time, she wasn't just a housekeeper. She was his shield. She had lost everything before, her daughter, her reputation, her freedom. But she would not let Noah lose his chance at life. Clara tucked the report into her suitcase, her resolve burning stronger than ever. Tomorrow, she would face Alexander. She would tell him everything, about Veronica, about the lies, about the truth. She didn't expect him to believe her immediately, but she had to try, because when the world said Noah couldn't speak, he had whispered to her, "I will heal you, Mommy." That wasn't a mistake. That was proof. And Clara Hayes was ready to fight. For him, for truth, for everything. One nurse finally spoke up, her voice shaking as she admitted she'd been fired for questioning a single report. Then another came forward, and another. The stories piled, up until Alexander couldn't ignore the truth anymore. A pattern emerged, sharp as glass. Veronica Hale had built an empire of control and silence. Obey her, and you stayed. Defy her, and you were destroyed. Clara Hayes hadn't just resisted. She had exposed the cracks. Alexander's chest tightened as he hired an independent investigator. Within days, the results were damning. Forged documents, signatures that didn't match, dates that contradicted each other. Metadata screaming manipulation. Every shred of evidence pointed to one person, Veronica. The deeper he dug, the heavier his guilt grew. This wasn't just about clearing Clara's name anymore. It was about every parent she had silenced, every child she had trapped in a false label. And Alexander swore, this time, he wouldn't look away. He built a file thicker than any boardroom contract. Testimonies, bank records, altered evaluations. His legal team warned him, She has powerful friends. Taking her down won't be clean. But Alexander didn't care. He had been blind for too long, letting her destroy lives under his protection. That ended now. Still, the mansion didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like a prison. Empty halls echoed with Noah's cries. The boy barely spoke, sometimes only whispering, "Mommy," to himself in the dark. Clara wasn't allowed contact during the investigation, but one night she called, her voice low, trembling. "Tell him I'm not gone," she whispered. Alexander promised he would. That night, he sat by his son's bed, staring at the bruises on Noah's little arms where he had hit himself. He looked out the window and made a vow. Veronica had stolen enough. She would pay, even if it cost him everything. Meanwhile, Clara sat alone in a small, rented guest house miles away. She hadn't heard Noah's voice in weeks. Her hands shook as she scrolled her phone, hovering over something she had kept hidden for months. One last piece of proof. A voicemail. Veronica's voice, sharp and venomous. "You speak, and I'll ruin you again." Clara's chest burned as she replayed it, just to be sure. Then she pressed Alexander's number. When he answered, she didn't explain. She simply said, "Play this." By the time the message ended, Alexander's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles bled. Twice he replayed it, no doubt in his mind. This wasn't just unprofessional. It was a threat. Cold, clear, criminal. Within the hour, his lawyers had the recording. Their reply was immediate. "This changes everything." The motion to reopen the case was filed. Faster than anyone expected, the court approved a full hearing. News spread like wildfire. Parents once silenced began stepping forward. On the first day of trial, the courtroom overflowed. Veronica Hale sat stiff in the defendant's chair, mask of calm cracking every time a new witness rose. Clara sat quietly beside her attorney, no fear in her eyes this time. She had nothing left to lose. A mother described being pressured into dangerous medications her daughter never needed. A nurse revealed reports rewritten before submission. A father testified about alternative diagnoses ignored. His child forced into treatments that made him worse. Then came the recordings. Veronica's voice echoed in the courtroom. "Stick with autism. Don't confuse the parents. Make them believe it's permanent. They'll spend more." Gasps filled the room. For the first time, Veronica's mask shattered. Finally, Alexander took the stand. His hands trembled as he held his statement, but his voice carried through the chamber. "My son was labeled broken, so someone could profit. That ends today." Silence followed, the kind that carries weight. When the verdict came, the judge's words cut through every lie. Clara Hayes, fully cleared. Veronica Hale, guilty of fraud, misconduct, and under criminal investigation. No cheers, no applause. Just justice. Outside the courthouse, Clara clutched the envelope Alexander handed her. Inside, a letter confirming she was free to return home. No restrictions. She held it close to her chest. That evening, she stepped back into the mansion. At the top of the stairs stood Noah, thinner, paler, eyes heavy with shadows. For one breathless second, he only stared. Then he ran. Small feet. Thundered down the steps until he crashed into her arms, sobbing, whispering again and again, "You came back." Grace's arms wrapped tight around him. Alexander stood nearby, eyes wet, until something inside him broke. For the first time, he stepped forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. No hesitation, no pride, just a family, broken but alive. That night, for the first time in weeks, Noah ate. Half a plate, but enough. Grace hummed beside him, and he leaned into her shoulder like he had never let go. Alexander watched in silence, heart finally lighter. In the weeks that followed, change spread. No more so-called experts treating Noah like a case. No more silence. Alexander launched the Grant Foundation for Ethical Pediatric Care, not with fireworks or galas, but with purpose, to protect children from misdiagnosis, to give families honest care, and to ensure no other monster like Veronica ever rose again. Clara became director of outreach, not for power, but for parents, visiting clinics, speaking with families, rebuilding trust brick by brick. And then came the moment Clara had never dared hope for. Months after the trial, her lawyer called. Her son, Leo, now 9, wanted to meet. Their first meeting was quiet, careful. He didn't cry, didn't rush, just looked at her and whispered, "Hi." It was enough. Each visit grew longer, warmer. Slowly, Leo began calling her Mom. And one day, when he visited the mansion, Noah shyly offered him his toy stethoscope. "You can use it too." Clara turned away so they wouldn't see her tears. The mansion, once haunted by silence, came alive. Finger paint on the walls, toys scattered across the floor, quiet laughter echoing through halls that had only known emptiness. Alexander stopped reading financial reports at night. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching with Noah. Clara stopped apologizing for the noise. This wasn't chaos, it was life. Imperfect, messy, real. Outside, the foundation grew. Inside, their family healed, slowly, carefully, together, and then came the gala. A grand hall, glittering lights, every table filled with doctors, parents, and officials. But tonight wasn't about money. Tonight was about something no one expected. From behind the curtain, Noah stood ready, wearing a blazer too big for him, clutching the same toy stethoscope he had carried since the day he first spoke. The host's voice rang, "We have someone very special who'd like to share a few words." The spotlight shifted. For a moment, Noah froze. Cameras flashed. The crowd held its breath. Then he looked at Clara, smiled faintly, and stepped forward. The microphone shook in his hands. Silence filled the room. Then, in a soft but clear voice, he said, "This is my mommy. She healed me. Now I heal her." Gasps. Tears. The room erupted in applause. Clara nearly collapsed, tears flooding her eyes. Richard covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. For years, silence had chained their lives. Tonight, one sentence broke it forever. Noah added one more line, turning to the crowd with a tiny grin. "And Daddy helps too." Laughter rippled, breaking the tension. Richard laughed through tears, meeting Clara's eyes across the room. No words needed. Everything was understood. The headlines the next day weren't about Veronica or her sentencing or her fall. They were about Noah, the boy who found his voice. That night, back at the mansion, the family sat in the living room. The gala clothes still on, but no one cared. Noah and Leo stacked blocks on the carpet, giggling quietly. Clara leaned her head on Alexander's shoulder. "Did that really happen?" she whispered. Alexander squeezed her hand. "Yes, and it was real." No more silence, no more fear. Just family. Imperfect. Healing. Alive. What do you think? Can money ever heal a child's broken heart? Or is love the only cure? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your voice. And if this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to Black Nation Strength, because here every story reveals the hidden power of the human heart.